Start with the inspector, the quiet, detail-obsessed guardian of order, usually mapped to the ISTJ profile. Historians have long pointed to figures like George Washington as fitting this exact mold. A man famously more comfortable with meticulous record-keeping than public speaking, who according to his own diaries tracked his farm's expenses down to the shilling for over 40 years. Here's the mechanism. Inspectors run on what psychologists call systemized cognition, an intense preference for rules, structure, and verified fact over improvisation, and a 2014 workplace study found employees with this profile had error rates in compliance-heavy roles nearly 30% lower than average. But it's the reason audits, hospitals, and aircraft maintenance logs don't fall apart. Then there's the campaigner, the ENFP, restless and idea-hungry, constantly pulling connections between things that don't obviously belong together. Researcher Shelley Carson at Harvard linked this kind of profile to reduced latent inhibition of a brain that fails to automatically filter out irrelevant information, the exact mechanism behind unusually original thinking. Here's the thing nobody tells you about campaigners. That same trait that makes them scatter across 6 unfinished projects is the trait responsible for the one idea that actually changes something. Move to the nurturer, the ISFJ, often the quietest person in a room and also, statistically, the one who remembers everyone's birthday. A 2016 study on workplace helping behavior found ISFJ-aligned individuals scored highest across all 16 types on what researchers call organizational citizenship behavior. Small, unrewarded acts that keep a team functioning. The mechanism is simple. High conscientiousness paired with high empathy creates a person who notices what needs doing before being asked. Teams don't run on charisma. They run on the person nobody thanks enough. The mastermind, the INTJ, is the long-range strategist, and Nikola Tesla is the example historians reach for constantly, a man who reportedly visualized entire working machines in his head, down to individual components, before ever touching a tool. That's not folklore. It maps directly onto what cognitive scientists call strong working memory manipulation of abstract systems. Here's where it gets interesting. A 2011 study on strategic planning ability found individuals with this thinking style outperformed peers specifically on multi-step problems requiring them to hold an entire system in mind at once, rather than solving it piece by piece. The Virtuoso, the ISTP, is the hands-on problem solver. The type mechanics and combat pilots get recruited disproportionately. Chuck Yeager, the test pilot who broke the sound barrier in 1947 at Mach 1.06, described his own process not as careful deliberation, but as an instant physical feel for a malfunctioning aircraft. The mechanism behind that is procedural intelligence reasoning that bypasses slow verbal processing and goes straight from sensory input to action, which is exactly why virtuosos perform best under time pressure that would freeze a more analytical type. The artist, the ISFP, gets stereotyped as passive, but look at Frédéric Chopin, who composed almost entirely from private, felt emotion rather than formal theory, reportedly revising the same 16 bars for weeks until they matched an internal feeling he couldn't fully explain. Here's the mechanism. ISFPs run on strong internal value systems paired with acute sensory awareness, a combination psychologists tied to what's called aesthetic sensitivity, literally a lower threshold for detecting beauty and dissonance that most people walk straight past. The Mediator, the INFP, is the idealist, and researcher Elaine Aron's work on sensory processing sensitivity overlaps heavily with this profile. Roughly 20% of the population processes emotional and environmental information more deeply than average. That depth is exhausting in a loud world, but here's what nobody tells you. Aron's follow-up research found these same individuals, when placed in supportive conditions, consistently outperformed less sensitive peers on tasks requiring nuance, empathy, and long-term ethical reasoning. The thinker, the INTP, is the type most likely to correct your mid-sentence with a footnote. Ludwig Wittgenstein reportedly rewrote single paragraphs of philosophy dozens of times, unable to move forward until every logical gap was closed. The mechanism is a documented preference for internal consistency over social smoothing. INTPs will sacrifice being liked for being correct, and while that costs them in small talk, it's exactly the trait research on peer review has found catches errors everyone else waved through. The Dynamo, the ESTP, thrives on live action and immediate feedback. Theodore Roosevelt, who led the Rough Riders in an actual cavalry charge up San Juan Hill in 1898 rather than directed from behind, fits the archetype closely. Neurologically, this maps onto heightened dopaminergic reward sensitivity to real-time risk, the same mechanism researcher Colin D. Young linked to extroversion, a brain that gets a stronger anticipatory reward signal the moment stakes go up, rather than shutting down under pressure. The performer, the ESFP, reads a room's emotional temperature in seconds. Research on emotional contagion, pioneered by psychologist Elaine Hatfield in the 1990s, found certain individuals unconsciously mirror and amplify the mood of a group faster than others, functioning almost like a social tuning fork. Here's the payoff. That same mirroring makes performers disproportionately effective in live, high-stakes communication, teaching, hosting, performing where reading an audience in real time matters more than a script. The debater, the ENTP, is wired to argue positions they don't even hold, purely to stress test them. This maps to what researchers call devil's advocacy processing, and a 2009 study on group decision-making found teams that included someone willing to argue the unpopular position made measurably better final decisions than teams that reached consensus too quickly. The debater isn't difficult for fun. They're the immune system against groupthink. The executive, the ESTJ, runs on structure and measurable outcomes. General Dwight Eisenhower, who coordinated the logistics behind the D-Day invasion of over 156,000 troops across 5 beaches on a single morning in June 1944, is the textbook example of someone whose gift wasn't inspiration but flawless operational execution. The mechanism is high conscientiousness fused with a strong preference for external, verifiable structure, the exact combination organizational psychologists find predicts project completion rates far better than raw intelligence does. The provider, the ESFJ, keeps a community's social infrastructure running, the person who actually organizes the reunion instead of just wanting one to happen. Research on social capital, notably by sociologist Robert Putnam, found that communities with a higher density of this connective, organizing temperament showed measurably stronger civic participation and lower isolation rates. It's an invisible kind of labor, but pull it out of any group and watch how fast the group stops functioning as a group at all. The protagonist, the ENFJ, is the type most associated with charismatic, values-driven leadership and Martin Luther King Jr., who could read and adjust the emotional register of a crowd of 250,000 people in real time during his 1963 speech at the Lincoln Memorial, is the case study historians return to constantly. The mechanism is high empathic accuracy combined with strong verbal expressiveness, a pairing psychologists have tied to transformational leadership outcomes. Followers don't just comply, they internalize the message. The commander, the ENTJ, is the decisive, top-down strategist, and a 2011 Stanford and UC Berkeley analysis of Fortune 500 CEO personality profiles found this exact combination of low agreeableness and high extroversion overrepresented at the top of major organizations, precisely because ambiguous high-stakes decisions favor someone willing to choose fast and own the consequences without needing consensus first. And finally, the advocate, the INFJ, statistically one of the rarest types, estimated at under 2% of the population. Carl Jung himself, the psychiatrist whose theories the entire framework descends from, is often retroactively typed this way: a man who spent years mapping the internal architecture of the unconscious mind almost entirely through his own dreams and introspection. The mechanism here is a rare fusion of deep internal intuition with genuine outward concern for others, which is precisely why advocates show up disproportionately in counseling, writing, and long-form advocacy work professions that require sitting inside someone else's internal world for extended periods without losing your own. So look at everything stacking up across all 16. You've got inspectors catching the errors nobody else notices. You've got campaigners generating the one idea worth keeping out of 6 half-finished ones. You've got nurturers and providers holding this social infrastructure together while nobody's watching. You've got masterminds and thinkers running entire systems or arguments in their heads before saying a word. You've got virtuosos and dynamos performing best exactly when the pressure spikes. You've got artists and mediators detecting nuance, and the rest of the room walks straight past. You've got debaters protecting the group from its own groupthink. And you've got executives, commanders, protagonists, and advocates, each leading in a completely different register through structure, through decisiveness, through inspiration, through depth. Here's the unifying thread underneath all 16. Every single type solves a problem the other 15 are structurally worse at solving. That's not a coincidence, and it's not clever branding from a mother-daughter team working out of a home office in the 1940s either. It's the same evolutionary logic behind every personality framework humans have ever built, going back to 4 bodily fluids in ancient Greece. A species that produced only commanders would out-execute itself into ruin with no one questioning the plan. A species that produced only mediators would feel everything and finish nothing. The 16 types aren't 16 competing answers to who's the best kind of person. They're 16 different tools in the same box, each one useless for most jobs, and completely irreplaceable for one specific job.